Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban were supposed to be one of the few Hollywood couples that actually made it. 2 decades, 2 kids, 2 careers still thriving. But in September 2025, the fantasy cracked after 20 years of marriage. Nicole filed for divorce.
Keith Urban, when my cheek is against yours, everything melts away. I love you so much.
Keith Urban is on stage for his first show since Nicole Kidman filed for divorce.
Just one day after news broke that Keith had been publicly serenading a 25-year-old country singer singing the exact same love song he once wrote for Nicole.
Who's having more fun today, you or her?
We both are equal.
Except this time, he changed the name, changed the lyrics, changed the girl. You already know this ain't gonna end well. And the internet lost its entire mind.
Nicole Kidman has filed for divorce from Keith Urban after 19 years of marriage.
Fans were shook, insiders were whispering, and social media was doing what it does best, investigating every post, every quote, every look she gave him on red carpets dating back to 2019.
The court papers show the actress will remain the primary caregiver of the couple's teenage daughters.
The signs were there. We just didn't see them.
Plans?
Well, I guess I'm not the one to ask. Yeah, we'll see.
So you let her plan?
Yeah.
Today, we're diving headfirst into the rise and fall of this so-called golden couple. From Nicole's tragic history with Tom Cruise and a strange separation from her kids, to Keith's rehab stints, daddy issues, and Serial almost settling everything in this story was quietly screaming run, and somehow they still said, I do.
My wife, Nicole Mary, is here tonight. I love you, baby girl.
The shock. I have the most extraordinary partner in life.
Why did Nicole ignore the warning signs? How did Keith go from the love of her life to performing flirty duets with his new muse in less than a year?
Incredible mom. Loving, maternal. Next year will be 20 years that I've been madly in love with you. Congratulations, baby girl. I love you.
Let's get into it. Before Keith ever slid into her life, Nicole Kidman was already deep in one of the most bizarre celebrity relationships of all time. Tom Cruise, a love story wrapped in tabloid smoke and Scientology mirrors. It started in 1990, when 23-year-old Nicole married 28-year-old Tom just days after filming Days of Thunder. At the time, Nicole was a rising ingenue. Tom was already a box office powerhouse, and everyone around her screamed, "Don't do it." Her agents warned her that marrying Tom Cruise would kill her career. Nicole didn't care. She said she was in love. She dove headfirst into what she thought were forever. But girl, forever didn't even last a dozen years. They adopted 2 kids, Isabella and Connor, but behind the scenes, things were strange. Reports say Nicole wasn't fully on board with Tom's ties to Scientology, and allegedly, that became a problem. After 11 years together, Tom abruptly filed for divorce in 2001 right after she had a miscarriage. Yes, you read that right. No warning. Just papers. Even messier, after the divorce, both adopted kids stayed with Tom and cut ties with Nicole. People have speculated for years that Scientology allegedly encouraged the estrangement. Nicole has remained painfully quiet about it. When asked, she said, "I choose not to speak publicly about my children. They're adults now. They can speak for themselves." That's when the world started side-eyeing the situation. So let's get this straight. She lost her husband, lost her kids, lost her peace, and stayed silent through it all? Phew. But here's the part people overlook. Nicole was famous, but not powerful. Not yet. She was still seen as Tom's wife, not Nicole the Oscar-winning icon. And in those circles, keeping your head down was survival. So she stayed quiet, wore the red carpets, and tried to keep her dignity while healing in private. Now let's be real. Anyone walking out of a decade-long marriage, especially one with that much secrecy and emotional fallout, isn't just walking into their next relationship with an open heart. They are walking in with luggage. And Nicole? She was carrying a trunk full of unresolved trauma, spiritual baggage, and a deep craving for something simple, grounded, and real. That's when Keith appeared. From the outside, he looked like the total opposite of Tom. Australian, chill, a little bit of country, a little bit chaotic, and definitely not part of a powerful religious empire. Nicole's attraction to Keith wasn't just romantic, it was reactionary. After years of control and image management, she finally had a man who wasn't trying to own her. But we're gonna find out later, just because someone feels different from your last heartbreak doesn't mean they are right. So now, we've got a woman with deep scars and a man with hidden wounds. And if you thought that was the end of Nicole's pain parade, honey, we're just getting started. Now let's talk about the cowboy crooner who stole Nicole's heart and eventually broke it. Keith Urban is a country star with dimples, a guitar, and a backstory that feels like a rehab memoir wrapped in a romance novel. Before he ever met Nicole, Keith was out here living real reckless, racking up red flags like Grammy nominations. Born in New Zealand, raised in Australia, Keith grew up in a household soaked in alcohol. His father, an alcoholic. And Keith, he inherited more than just the accent. In his own words, "It took me a long time to believe I was wired the same." By the late 90s, Keith had talent, charm, and a habit, the holy trinity of heartbreak. His ex-girlfriend Laura Sigler once said, "He's very seductive when he wants to be, but I'm not sure he'll ever be ready to settle down." You don't say. He dated model Nikki Taylor. He toured constantly, partied harder, and eventually spiraled into addiction. In 1998, just before his first big studio album dropped, Keith checked into rehab for the first time. That's before he was even famous. And this wasn't your average, "I partied too hard on tour" situation. Keith was using alcohol and cocaine as survival tools. He told the Times he felt like a mess of a man, lost, insecure, and emotionally wrecked. He even joked, "I have an allergy to alcohol. When I drink, I break out in handcuffs." Cute line, but behind the humor was real pain. The worst part? Even when Keith got sober, the damage wasn't done. He said sobriety didn't magically fix his confidence issues. He still didn't feel worthy of love, let alone love from a woman like Nicole Kidman. So when they met in 2005 at a fancy Hollywood gala, Keith was still trying to keep himself afloat. A mutual friend gave him Nicole's number, and this man sat on it for 4 months. 4 months. Nicole later told Ellen DeGeneres, "I had a crush on him and he wasn't interested." But the truth? He was interested. He just didn't think he stood a chance. He told an Oscar TV show, "I thought she was way out of my league." And if that doesn't scream wounded man energy, I don't know what does. Keith was in recovery. He was battling demons, doubting himself, and trying to stay sober in an industry that runs on free drinks and late nights. But somehow, when he finally called Nicole, they clicked. They talked, and talked, and talked. Keith said it was effortless. Nicole said it felt like fate. But let's pause here. Effortless chemistry doesn't mean it's going to be an easy relationship. Keith may have looked like a safe, humble alternative to Tom Cruise, but he was still deep in his own internal chaos. And the worst part? Nicole had no idea just how dark it was going to get. By the time Keith finally called Nicole, the sparks flew fast and hot. It wasn't just a flirtation. It was a full-blown rom-com montage, but with celebrities, emotional trauma, and paparazzi on speed dial. They talked for hours on that first call. Keith said it felt effortless. Nicole said she felt seen for the first time in years. He wasn't Tom. He wasn't a megastar trying to mold her. He was charming, damaged, artistic, and he made her laugh. And when you've been emotionally starved for over a decade, laughter hits like a love potion. 6 months later, Keith showed up at 5 a.m. on Nicole's doorstep in New York holding a bouquet of flowers for her birthday. And in that moment, she said, "This is the man I hope I get to marry." And baby, she did. They got engaged in 2006 and were married in Sydney just a few months later in a candlelit ceremony straight out of a romance novel. Dove, violins, and glowing headlines. Nicole finds her soulmate. Country star saves Hollywood actress. It was a fairy tale we didn't know we needed. And after the Tom Cruise saga, everyone wanted her to win. Nicole even went symbolic with it. She burned all her old diaries, said they were full of bad things from her past. Keith relapsed just 4 months after the wedding, and Nicole, she didn't run. She staged an intervention and had him admitted to the Betty Ford Clinic. When people asked why she stayed, she said, "I chose love." That line stuck with fans. It became her anthem. Love over logic, heart over history. For a while, that choice seemed to work. They moved to a quiet farm outside Nashville. Nicole stepped back from the spotlight. Keith focused on his music. They welcomed their daughter Sunday Rose in 2008 and Faith Margaret in 2010, the latter born via surrogate. They lived like an artsy little dream team, private, romantic, and unapologetically weird. Nicole once described their relationship as raw, dangerous, and out at sea. And sure, that sounds poetic, but it also sounds like code for chaos. Because beneath the surface, the waves were already starting to build. Now here's where the fairy tale gets weird and a little dark. Just months after their dreamy wedding, Keith spiraled again and Nicole had to act fast. She staged a full-blown intervention and got him into the Betty Ford Clinic. He stayed there for 3 months. While most new brides are planning honeymoons, Nicole was begging her new husband to choose sobriety. In an interview years later, Keith said, "I had no idea what was going to happen to us." Nicole, on the other hand, didn't flinch. She pushed past every negative voice, including the ones in her own head, and held on. Whether that was strength or denial depends on who you ask. But let's be honest, you can't build a life on rehabilitations and blind faith alone. Nicole admitted she has a history of being addicted to love, obsessed with it. Before Keith, she was chasing passion, fantasy, even strange fetishes, as she once put it. She called her past experiences unhealthy explorations of love. And that's not gossip, that's straight from Nicole's mouth. She burned her diary for a reason. The truth? Nicole wasn't looking for a cute little marriage. She was chasing intensity, something big enough to overwrite the chaos of her past. So when Keith brought his own set of demons, she didn't run, she leaned in. Danger didn't scare her. It felt familiar. She once said their marriage was adventurous, raw, and incredibly dangerous, like being out at sea. Girl, that's not a love story. That's survival film. But to the outside world, they were goals. A-list, glamorous, country and class, in a capsule. No one saw the storm brewing, because the more they smiled for cameras, the more they were barely holding it together behind the scenes. Keith credited Nicole with saving his life literally. He said her support was the reason he stayed clean, and she wore that like a badge of honor. But here's the thing. When you become someone's anchor, it's only a matter of time before you start drowning too. And Nicole? She was already knee-deep in deep water, still smiling, still showing up, still hoping love would be enough. But this love? It was already starting to crack. To their credit, they really did try. After the rehab stay, Nicole and Keith moved to Tennessee and built a quiet life just outside Nashville. Think chickens, acreage, songwriting retreats, and slow Sundays. Nicole called it her sanctuary. Keith called it healing. They had 2 daughters, Sunday and Faith, and from the outside, it looked like they had finally found their peace. They weren't flashy. They weren't scandalous. They were just doing the work. Also, it seemed. Keith poured his heart into music, and some of it was clearly about Nicole. Songs like The Fighter and Gemini were open love letters. In Gemini, he famously sings, "She's a maniac in the bed, but a brainiac in her head." And look at Ray's eyebrows. Sure. But Nicole loved it. She called it cheeky and said she was flattered. He even called her his muse. They appeared on red carpets hand in hand, gave sweet interviews about separate bathrooms and love notes, and even renewed their vows in 2016. It was giving second wind. It was giving we made it. But behind the scenes, it was still a balancing act, one built on fragile trust, past trauma, and daily work. Nicole often gushed about Keith in public, but insiders said she was always watching, making sure the past didn't repeat itself. Keith had stayed sober, but addiction never really leaves. And Nicole? She had traded chaos for vigilance. Some say that's still a form of survival mode. They did therapy. They took breaks from Hollywood. They raised their girls out of the spotlight. They leaned into routine, rituals, even weird superstitions. In 2025, Nicole told W Magazine the key to their marriage was separate toilets and a double-headed shower. Everyone laughed, but maybe that was the point. You laugh, you distract, you carry on. Because when 2 people are trying this hard to look okay, they usually aren't. And as much as they tried, the cracks were widening. Nicole's social posts became less frequent. Keith's interviews became vague. They were both smiling, just not at each other. They weren't failing, but they were fragile. And all it takes is one small crack for everything to fall apart. By late 2024, the sparkle was starting to fade, and fans began to notice. Keith and Nicole still made appearances, but something felt off. The chemistry that once radiated from red carpets had cooled into something stiff and overly rehearsed. Smiles looked forced. Hand-holding seemed more like posing. And in Hollywood, where PR-trained perfection is the norm, even a slight shift reads like trouble. The biggest clue? The distance. They started showing up to major events alone. Nicole hit the Oscars solo. Keith attended the CMA Awards without his usual arm candy. Publicists chalked it up to scheduling conflicts, but fans weren't buying it. People started asking, where's Keith? Where's Nicole? Why weren't they gushing about each other anymore? Then came the weird interviews. In June 2025, Nicole posted a sweet throwback photo to celebrate their 19th wedding anniversary. She called Keith her rock, her partner, her love. But just days later, Keith did an Australian radio interview, and when asked about Nicole, he froze. The hosts were being cheeky. What does Keith Urban think when he sees his beautiful wife filming love scenes with Zac Efron? Keith awkwardly laughed, said nothing, and then disconnected from the Zoom. Literally left the call. It was awkward, it was messy, and it was obvious something was seriously wrong. But the real stinger? There was no joint anniversary celebration, no couple's photo, no sweet message in return. For a couple that had built their brand on vulnerability and public affection, the silence spoke volumes. Insiders whispered about growing apart and emotional distance. Nicole was spending more time in Nashville with the kids. Keith was reportedly living in a separate property still in Tennessee, but away from the family home. Close friends said they were like ships in the night, polite, but distant. They weren't fighting. They weren't loving. They were just coexisting. And that kind of emotional silence. It's deafening. At that point, the public still hoped it was just a rough patch. Every couple hits bumps, right? But this wasn't a bump. This was a pre-collapse, still being dressed in designer clothes in denial, and the world was about to find out just how far gone things really were. September 29th, 2025, the day the headline confirmed what fans had feared for months. Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban had separated after 20 years of marriage. Sources close to the couple told People in TMZ that Nicole had been fighting to save the relationship. But Keith? He had already checked out. He'd been living in a separate property since early summer. Nicole was staying in the main house with their daughters, doing damage control while the man she loved was already gone. And when I say gone, I mean physically, emotionally, and spiritually absent. But let's back it up for a second. The unraveling didn't start in September. It started months earlier. In private, quietly, slowly. The kind of emotional death that doesn't make noise until it explodes. One insider claimed they were spending less and less time together. They stopped traveling as a family. The energy shifted. Another said Nicole was still committed. Keith was somewhere else. And now we know where that somewhere else might have been, but hold that thought. We'll get to her in a minute. Just one day after the separation news broke, Nicole filed for divorce. One day later. That's not hesitation. That's a woman who's been ready. Who's done the crying, who's done the forgiving, who's stared at empty space in bed long enough to realize she's already alone. And let's talk about the reaction. Nicole's team released a vague statement about privacy and respect. Keith said nothing, not a tweet, not a quote, not even a wishing her the best. Just silence. The same man who once wrote songs about her now couldn't string together a single sentence. Nicole was devastated. Sources said she felt betrayed and blindsided. But honestly, I think she was just done pretending. This wasn't some explosive breakup. This was a love that faded while everyone else was still watching the highlight reel. And let's not forget this wasn't just a breakup. This was Nicole Kidman, leaving behind a 20-year marriage, on her own terms. When the final curtain came down, Nicole didn't beg. She bowed, and then she walked away. If the divorce announcement was a thunderclap, what came next was a lightning strike. Just 3 days after the separation was confirmed, the internet exploded. A video surfaced posted by 25-year-old rising country singer Maggie Bow. In it, she's performing a duet on stage with none other than Keith Urban. And the song? The Fighter. Yep, the same love song Keith wrote about Nicole. But here's where it gets diabolical. During performance, Keith changed the lyrics. Instead of "When they're trying to get to you, baby, I'll be the fighter," he sang. "When they're trying to get to you, Maggie, I'll be your guitar player." Excuse me? The man didn't even try to be slick. He swapped Nicole's name out for a 25-year-old in a song that was once his public declaration of eternal love. On stage, in public, with cameras rolling. And then Maggie, with no shame in her sparkly little boots, uploaded it herself. That part right there, bold. The video went viral in less than an hour. Fans were shocked. Critics were dragging. And Twitter? It was on fire. People called it tone-deaf, cruel, and embarrassing. Some even accused Keith of using Maggie to spark a PR rebound. Others wondered, was this performance just the tip of the iceberg? Had he been seeing her while still married? Maggie didn't respond to the speculation. Keith stayed silent. No denial, no clarification. But honestly, you don't need a press release when the evidence is singing into a hot MIC with the side piece standing 2 feet away. From love songs to diss tracks in front of a live audience. Nicole didn't comment either. But the look on her face in a paparazzi photo taken the next day, you didn't need words. So here we are. From red carpets and love songs to separate houses and side chick serenades, the Kidman-Urban marriage didn't just end. It imploded. Quietly, publicly, messily. And yet, there's something about Nicole's silence that speaks louder than any headline. While Keith was out here rewriting lyrics and performing with his new muse, Nicole kept it graceful. No interviews. No clapbacks. No tell-alls. Just a few cryptic Instagram quotes about peace and letting go. And honestly, that's power. Because when a woman stops explaining herself, that's when healing begins. But make no mistake, this wasn't just a failed marriage. This was a collapse of a narrative. The idea that love can fix addiction. That patience guarantees loyalty. That standing by your man means he'll stand by you. Nicole gave everything her stability, her emotional labor, her heart, and in the end, it still wasn't enough. And Keith? He went from grateful husband to country cliché in record time. A man who once credited Nicole with saving his life now seems to be throwing shade with guitar pick. But before we close this chapter, let's give Nicole her flowers. She's endured public heartbreak, private estrangement, and internal battles we'll never fully understand. And through it all, she kept her poise. She walked through fire twice, once with Tom, once with Keith, and still glows like a woman who knows her worth. Love hasn't always been kind to Nicole Kidman, but it never dimmed her light. Here's hoping next time she chooses peace over chaos, and a man who sees her not as a muse but as an equal. If you made it this far, you already know the tea was hot. Like, comment, and subscribe for more.